Usually when we think about DNA and genetics, there's this expectation of continuous instruction.
Right, like an endless manual.
Exactly. It's like the ultimate biological blueprint. The code is always telling your body, grow hair here or make these eyes brown. It just builds and builds.
Yeah, it's a very loud, busy process.
Right.
We definitely fixate on those active sequences. I mean, the parts of the code that are constantly churning out amino acids to physically construct who we are.
But then you step deeper into the mechanics of it, and suddenly you realize that a sprawling sentence is absolutely nothing without a period at the end of it.
A biological hard pause.
Right. And that is where this concept of the stop codon comes in. It's not an instruction to build. It's a genetic marker that literally tells the cellular machinery to just halt.
It just stops. And what is so compelling about that mechanism is how that physical microscopic reality perfectly mirrors our psychological and spiritual development.
And that intersection is exactly where we're going today. So welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission for you listening is to unpack a really intriguing audio excerpt we've been analyzing.
It's a fascinating piece of material.
It really is. It revolves around a conceptual framework called the 56th gene key, which, you can think of it as a roadmap of human transformation.
Yeah, charting a very specific path.
Right. It starts from a baseline shadow state called distraction, moves through a gift called enrichment, all the way to this ultimate, almost rebellious state known as intoxication.
Though, we should probably give a word of warning before we get into the weeds here.
Oh, absolutely.
The source material explicitly states this is not meant to be a comfortable ride for you. Like, if you were looking for a cozy self-help paradigm designed to just pat you on the back.
Validate your current lifestyle choices.
Exactly. If you want validation, this framework will frustrate you.
Yeah.
It is engineered to create friction. The whole goal is to make you uncomfortable enough to finally awaken to the negative, deeply ingrained patterns that are, actively undermining your potential.
Because if you're not willing to look at those patterns with brutal honesty, the framework basically suggests you're just going to stay stuck in the loop.
Forever, basically.
Right. So today, we're going to decode this bizarre, fascinating roadmap and figure out how we can stop starving our true nature. And to understand the mechanism behind it, we really have to lean into that biological metaphor you mentioned, the stop codon.
Yeah, because in this framework, the 56th gene key doesn't code for an amino acid. It acts as one of 3 genetic stop codons in our spiritual DNA, so to speak.
Okay, so it's part of a larger system.
Right. It's part of a triad known as the Ring of Trials.
Wow.
It operates alongside the 33rd and 12th gene keys. And these aren't just, one-time hurdles.
I like checking a box and moving on.
No. They are ongoing archetypal tests that humanity continuously places in its own path. You simply cannot transition from that baseline shadow state to any higher level of awareness until you learn how to pass these specific tests.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that. If the goal is to transcend our destructive patterns, we first have to understand the architecture of the trap itself. Like, how are these so-called trials actually functioning in our daily routines?
Well, the material lays the architecture out quite methodically. The 33rd trial, for instance, is called the trial of forgetting.
The trial of forgetting?
Yeah, which represents this immense evolutionary pressure to remember our true connected nature, but that constantly battles against the heartbreaking ease with which we just forget who we really are.
We just lose track of it completely.
Exactly. But the 56th gene key is the operational linchpin here. It goes beyond acknowledging that we forget. It actually reveals the specific mechanism of how we forget.
And that mechanism is the shadow of distraction. And I think when we hear the word distraction today, the brain immediately goes to doom scrolling on a smartphone or binge watching television.
Right, screen time.
Yeah, screen time. But the argument here goes so much deeper than that. The source suggests we are being distracted by a relentless, exhausting cycle of pain and pleasure.
It's a treadmill.
Yeah.
We feel this deep, unfulfilled ache, like a kind of spiritual barrenness, right? And the immediate knee-jerk reaction is to seek an outlet through a quick dopamine hit of pleasure.
We're looking for an escape hatch.
Exactly. And that might take the form of food, sex, accumulating corporate power, or even, obsessively trying to construct a perfectly engineered Instagram-worthy life.
But the fundamental dilemma of this 56th shadow state is the impermanence of the fix. Like, the pleasure inevitably fades.
It always does.
And when the high wears off, the contrast leaves us with an ache that is significantly deeper than before.
And then that internal ache starts bleeding into our external lives. We project our emotional deficit onto our relationships.
Right, we blame our partners for not making us happy.
Yeah, we adopt a victim mentality, or the ache even manifests physically. We run to a doctor, or we hire a life coach, or we try some radical new diet. I mean, we are willing to do literally anything except sit down and address the fundamental pattern of avoidance.
Because, taking a wider view, this framework exposes the absolute illusion of the modern perfect lifestyle.
Oh, entirely. There is this huge societal idolization of curated existence, right? Beautiful homes by the sea, flawless families, artisanal food, and the text calls it all a false romance.
It's all constructed, and to illustrate just how destructive this relentless seeking is, there's that tragic real-world example offered about Ladakh.
Up in the Himalayas.
Yeah, that historical anecdote really anchored this concept for me.
It's a profound case study in cultural psychology. So Ladakh was this remote, incredibly beautiful place. And up until the 1960s, the people there lived entirely cut off from the globalized economy.
Totally isolated.
Completely.
Yeah.
And they maintained a genuinely happy, sustainable culture with incredibly deep spiritual roots. They were living in a state of natural equilibrium.
But then modern Western culture and media arrived.
Right. And within the span of just 20 years, the psychological foundation of that entire civilization crumbled.
It's devastating. Suddenly, a population of people who had been perfectly content for generations looked at external images of wealth and decided they were poor.
They internalized a sense of lack that just didn't exist before.
Yeah, and they got thrust onto the exact same exhausting treadmill of seeking manufactured pleasure that the rest of the world is on.
They were inoculated with the distraction, which really begs the underlying question, right? What is the distraction actually shielding us from?
What are we so afraid of?
Exactly. And the framework argues that we are distracting ourselves from our own true nature. Because at its core, our nature is so deeply intoxicating and immense that our fragile, ego-driven shadow selves are just terrified they'll be annihilated by it.
There's a wild anecdote in the material to illustrate what that level of pure intoxication actually looks like. It's about the 19th century mystic Ramakrishna.
Oh, this story is amazing.
Right. So this man was so prone to what they describe as God intoxication that he would simply be sitting with his students. And if someone merely uttered the word Krishna, just said the word, it acted as a trigger.
Like a switch flipping.
Yes. The sheer resonance of the concept would send his nervous system into a state of absolute trance-like ecstasy. He would completely check out of ordinary reality for hours.
Wow.
Yeah, casual conversation was nearly impossible because he was constantly being swept away by the immensity of the present moment.
And that extreme example highlights the profound, overwhelming connection we are actively running from. I mean, we engineer microscopic distractions in every corner of our lives, specifically to avoid being consumed by that kind of immensity.
Okay, I have to throw an analogy in here because this dynamic feels exactly like a digital anesthetic.
A digital anesthetic, I like that.
Yeah, like we use the constant low-level hum of the modern world to numb our own nervous systems. These distractions are incredibly addictive because they temporarily occupy our mental bandwidth.
They give us a fleeting sense of forward momentum.
Exactly. But the real terror, like the monster hiding in the closet, is just the suffocating silence that rushes in the second the television or the phone is finally turned off.
And that silence is the biological stop codon in action.
Oh, wow.
Right. When the screen goes black, the sequence halts. There is nothing left to build. And the argument here is that this stop codon is not a punishment. It is actually the greatest evolutionary gift we possess, despite the fact that we sprint in the opposite direction.
Which perfectly brings us to the second phase of the 56th gene key, the gift of enrichment.
And this is where the paradigm entirely flips.
Yeah, because the deeply counterintuitive aspect of this transition is that enrichment is not about upgrading your habits. It's not about swapping out cheap distractions for, like, high-quality intellectual distractions.
No, the moment you voluntarily halt the cycle of seeking pain and pleasure, the moment you stop feeding the machinery of distraction, whatever remains becomes naturally enriching.
It's what's left over.
Exactly. Enrichment isn't a new activity you add to your to-do list. It is the profound result of what you stop doing. And this concept is deeply tied to the ancient Taoist philosophy of Wu Wei.
Wu Wei being the art of doing by doing nothing. It is action through non-action.
It is a complete shift in psychological gears.
Yeah.
And the material brings this ancient philosophy into a highly relatable, modern arena.
Hmm.
Parenting in the age of ubiquitous technology.
Oh, this part was so real.
Because there is immense societal pressure to pacify children with screens.
Right.
Toddlers are handed iPads in restaurants because parents are understandably exhausted and just looking for a release valve.
But the author of the text and his wife were holdouts. They deliberately refused to use technology as a pacifier.
Which is so hard to do.
Right, but the goal wasn't just to be strict Luddites. It was to hold the digital noise at bay specifically so their children would learn how to metabolize boredom.
Metabolize boredom. That's a great way to put it.
The quote that really stuck with me from the source was, "If you can't get bored, you aren't tasting life."
And being able to sit with boredom is framed here as a vital emotional survival skill. The author even reflects on his own childhood being somewhat isolated in the woods.
Yeah, he talks about being agonizingly bored, right?
Yeah, and resenting it at times.
Yeah.
Especially when he compared his reality to his friends who were living highly stimulated lives in the city. But that enforced deprivation forced an adaptation.
He had to find something else.
Exactly. He had to learn to find microscopic stimulation in the trees, in the dirt, in the quiet. That environment fed his psychological roots and taught him the actual mechanics of contemplation.
Which perfectly operationalizes that famous observation from the 17th century philosopher Blaise Pascal.
Yeah.
All men's miseries derive from not being able to sit alone in a quiet room.
Yes. Enrichment requires learning to inhabit that quiet room without turning the enjoyment of the quiet room into a new goal. The presence itself is the point. The author illustrates this with a personal ritual of drinking rare Chinese pure tea, or, a very specific wine.
But the crucial distinction he makes is that the secret isn't hiding in the chemical makeup of the tea leaves or the fermented grapes.
It's not about the object.
No, the gift of enrichment is about cultivating an intense, grounded attentiveness. He talks about bringing a refined frequency, which really just translates to an absolute uncompromising presence to the preparation, the physical sensations, and the company.
It is about attuning your nervous system to the natural rhythm of the moment instead of constantly trying to manipulate it.
Okay, but here's where I need to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Because I think you listening are probably having the exact same reaction I am. It is very easy to romanticize boredom when we are talking about a child exploring a forest or someone peacefully sipping rare tea on a quiet afternoon.
Sure.
But as adults operating in a high-stakes modern economy, we don't just dislike inactivity. We are conditioned to view it as a moral failure.
If you aren't hustling, you're failing.
Exactly. If you are sitting still, you are falling behind. So how on earth is someone supposed to functionally exist in the stop codons of adult life? Like the terrifying gap between jobs, or that devastating space after a long relationship ends, without completely panicking about their survival. You can't just meditate your way out of needing to pay rent.
That's incredibly valid. But that panic you were describing, that is the shadow of distraction desperately fighting for its life.
Really?
Yes. The biological reality is that all living systems require cycles of intense activity followed by deep rest. When you hit that terrifying gap between jobs, the societal instinct is to scramble. We fill the void with frantic networking or just pure anxiety.
Right, we have to do something.
But this framework argues that inactivity is not empty. Psychologically, that void is where the embryo of immortality is fueled.
The embryo of immortality. I mean, that sounds incredibly mystical. Let's ground that. What does that actually mean in psychological terms?
Think of it as the deep incubation of your core identity. When you strip away the job title, the relationship status, the external validations, all the things you usually use to define yourself, you are left with the raw embryo of who you actually are.
So the gap forces you to face yourself.
Exactly. That terrifying gap is the only space where genuine self-discovery can happen, completely free from external demands. The true harvest of your character is brought in during the pause.
Wow.
The most powerful pivots in life come out of that nothingness, out of the Wu Wei.
Okay, so we learn to survive the stop codon. We stop frantically scrambling and we find enrichment in the pause. But the roadmap takes a really sharp turn here in the material.
It does, a very deceptive turn.
Right, because once you master the art of stopping, you hit this highly deceptive plateau. As your internal awareness becomes more subtle, the distractions upgrade. They become highly sophisticated. And this brings us to the threshold of the ultimate state of the 56 gene key, the CD of intoxication.
And let's just clarify that term for a moment for the listener. is an ancient Sanskrit word referring to an ultimate spiritual power or a state of complete attainment. It is not a literal city with, skyscrapers and traffic.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that, because the phonetic overlap is definitely confusing. So we are entering this elevated state of siddhi, and the trap here is fascinating.
When you are operating at this level of refinement, the distractions don't look like vices anymore. One of the greatest traps is actually something society universally praises: the desire to alleviate the suffering of others.
See, that is a massive paradigm shift. The desire to help suffering people is classified as a distraction.
It is considered a noble distraction, but yes, a distraction nonetheless.
Wow.
As people grow spiritually, their empathy naturally expands. The instinct is to rush in and offer comfort. But the framework cautions that to reach ultimate mastery, you have to let go of the ego-driven yearning to be the savior.
To fix everyone.
Right. Sometimes, when a friend or a partner is going through intense pain, they do not need your intervention. What they require is your absolute disinterested love and your radical trust that their suffering is a necessary catalyst for their own growth.
Okay, I have to stop you there, because that sounds, quite frankly, horribly selfish.
It does sound that way at first.
My instinct, and likely the listener's instinct, is that if someone you love is hurting and you have the power to stop it, failing to do so is just cruelty masquerading as enlightenment.
It absolutely shocks our conventional moral operating system. But to understand the mechanism behind this, the material references a famous parable told by the spiritual teacher Ram Dass.
Ah, the potato story.
Yes, the potato story. It involves a Himalayan master and his devotee. So the master hands his devotee 2 potatoes and instructs him to go down to the river to eat them.
Simple enough.
Right, but on the way, the devotee encounters a starving beggar pleading for food. The devotee is caught between obeying his guru and his own overwhelming compassion. Ultimately, he compromises.
He gives the starving man one of the potatoes.
Exactly. He returns feeling entirely justified in his charity, but the master immediately calls him a fool.
See why? Why does fixing the beggar's immediate material suffering make the devotee a fool? I struggled with this.
Because it reveals a lack of ultimate faith in the beggar's journey. The master explains that the devotee kept the potato of material fulfillment for himself and gave away the potato of spiritual enlightenment.
Oh, wow.
The logic here is that suffering often acts as the very fire that forces a soul to wake up. By rushing in to ease the beggar's physical pain, the devotee was actually soothing his own discomfort at having to witness suffering.
He made it about himself.
Exactly. He short-circuited the beggar's potential for hitting rock bottom, which might have been the exact catalyst the beggar needed for profound realization. It's about radical detachment. You remain deeply empathetic to their pain, but you refuse to interfere with the curriculum of their life.
That is a staggering level of psychological discipline. I mean, it requires you to confront the ugly truth that a lot of our charity is just a defense mechanism to make ourselves feel better.
It really is. And to embody that level of detachment while still engaging with the physical world, the text introduces a concept coined by the philosopher Osho, Zorba the Buddha.
Zorba the Buddha.
Yeah, Osho argued that ascetics like Ramakrishna, the mystic who constantly checked out of reality into trances, were actually incomplete. They were entirely spiritual, but fundamentally disconnected from the material world.
So what is the mechanism of Zorba the Buddha?
It's the fusion of 2 absolute extremes. Zorba refers to the fictional character Zorba the Greek, who represents raw, unapologetic, physical enjoyment of the material world. He drinks, he dances, he makes mistakes, completely free of guilt, but he lacks spiritual depth.
Right. And the Buddha side?
Buddha represents ultimate spiritual elevation, but can become cold and detached from the messy reality of human life. The ultimate state of intoxication is marrying the 2. You achieve the highest level of spiritual detachment while simultaneously diving headfirst into the sensual joy of the physical world.
Okay, so if Zorba the Buddha is the ultimate goal, the practical question becomes, how do we actually execute that? Like, how do you consume the world without being consumed by it?
That's the challenge.
And the deep dive points us toward a fascinating perspective from a 20th century Hungarian writer named Hamvas Bella. He proposed this concept called the divinization of the senses.
Hamvas Bella's logic is incredibly grounding here. He analyzes human biology and concludes that the mouth is the most profound of our 5 senses.
Which seems weird at first, right?
But think about the mechanics of perception. Your eyes observe the world from a safe distance. Your ears let the vibration get a little closer. Your hands map the physical boundaries of an object. But your mouth, the mouth is the only organ that completely demolishes the boundary between you and the outside world. To taste something is to literally ingest life.
He categorizes the mouth's function into three primary connections: speaking, eating, and kissing. And he actually elevates kissing to the pinnacle of human exchange because it is the only physical act where you are simultaneously giving and taking. To kiss life is to literally ingest its essence.
And this creates a stark behavioral contrast between two types of spiritual seekers outlined in the text: the renunciate and the intoxicate.
Right.
Traditional dogmas usually follow the path of the renunciate. They view worldly senses as dangerous triggers that steal your focus. So the strategy is always avoidance. They fast, they practice celibacy, they hide away in monasteries.
Keep the world at arm's length.
Exactly. But the intoxicate, the Zor of the Buddha, does the exact opposite. They don't avoid the triggers, they embrace them. They don't binge mindlessly, but they intentionally ingest the raw essences of life.
And crucially, this includes both the healthy, beautiful things and the poisonous, toxic things.
Yes, all of it.
Translating this into modern psychological terms, this sounds remarkably like radical exposure therapy.
That's a brilliant way to frame it.
You don't build emotional resilience by hiding in a sterile, trigger-free bubble. That is the renunciate way. You build an unbreakable emotional immune system by deliberately exposing yourself to the messy, agonizing, beautiful reality of the world.
That is the perfect modern equivalent.
Yeah.
The intoxicant builds an internal furnace so hot that it can metabolize anything, which leads to perhaps the most challenging assertion in the entire framework: the idea that suffering is fundamentally as sweet as pleasure.
That is so hard to swallow.
It is. But when you stop resisting pain, when you ingest it with radical openness and zero judgment, it loses its ability to destroy you. You learn to transmute the toxins of the world into wisdom.
It just changes the entire definition of what it means to be safe. Like, you aren't safe because nothing can hurt you. You are safe because you know you can digest whatever hurts you.
Precisely.
The source uses the ancient Sufi symbol of wine to explain this, right? Wine represents the essence of life. And the paradox of the city-state is that the more refined your internal furnace becomes, the less external stimulation you actually need.
Right. A single sip of reality is enough to make you profoundly intoxicated with gratitude.
Though, as the framework humorously notes, sometimes you just decide to drink the entire bottle anyway.
Because there's no guilt left.
Yeah.
It is a philosophy of total rebellion against fear. It suggests that the core of who you are is fundamentally whole and indestructible. The remedy for your anxiety isn't hiding on a mountaintop. It is everywhere around you, in the very friction of daily life, if you are just willing to ingest it.
So, to synthesize this massive journey for you listening, the 56 gene key is really an evolution of how we engage with reality.
A total evolution.
We start in the shadow of distraction, running desperately on the pain and pleasure treadmill, terrified of our own internal emptiness.
Then we collide with the biological stop codon.
Right.
We discover the gift of enrichment, not by finding better hobbies, but by practicing Wu Wei. We learn to sit in the terrifying gap, allowing ourselves to experience the profound incubatory magic of boredom and inactivity without panicking.
And finally, if we possess the discipline to keep refining that awareness, even letting go of our ego-driven need to play the savior and fix everyone else's pain, we unlock the CD of intoxication.
We become Zorba the Buddha.
Yes. We develop the emotional immune system to taste every single drop of life, the bitter suffering and the sweet joy, realizing that the wholeness we were frantically searching for was inside us the entire time.
It requires a radical, uncompromising trust in the human experience exactly as it unfolds.
It really does. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on today, circling right back to where we started with that biological metaphor.
The stop codon.
Exactly. If the 56th gene key operates at a cellular level as a stop codon, a literal genetic command to end a sequence, what if we applied that to our psychology? What if the next time you feel that sudden, sharp emotional ache or that wave of existential dread on a Sunday afternoon, you stop viewing it as a problem that needs to be instantly medicated with a screen, a drink, or a purchase?
What if you just sit with it?
Right. What if the moment you desperately reach for your phone to kill the silence in the room, you treat that silence as your spiritual DNA telling you that a crucial, outdated chapter of your identity is ending?
And you just let it end.
Yeah. What kind of deeply intoxicating life might finally have the space to begin in that exact emptiness?